what can we do to calm the body, that is actually really important, because sometimes we are spinning out, like we're too overwhelmed, too worried, too anxious, etc. It happens to all of us to be mindful, right? It's just hard. And it can't be mindful all the time. I mean, that's the goal, but it's really, really tough. And so, that's where these tools of reminding ourselves that we're in control of any situation that we're in, what we're in control of, reminding ourselves of that actually restores that sense of calmness in the body almost immediately. And there's 4 major things that we talk about that are really effective tools for doing that.
Welcome, Dave Rabin, to the show. Dr. Dave Rabin, sorry to miss that. Thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let's just get started. I would love to know, just by explaining to those listening, your background and what led you into merging psychiatry and neuroscience.
I think you froze for a second.
Oh, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Let me just say that again. So I would love for those listening to know how you got into merging psychiatry and neuroscience into each other, and what's your background that led you there?
So for me, it was the study of consciousness and the way we think and form meaning and thoughts about the world and ourselves. And this has been something that's been interesting to humans for a long time, from the standpoint of like, what does the word real mean, right? What is, when we talk about, kids who have dreams, when you're really young, like I had very vivid dreams as a kid. And when you have those dreams and they feel real and you don't know what the difference is, right? Things can become confusing, and dreams can get really scary or really, really exciting. And when I had very vivid dreams as a kid, going back to like 4 to 6 years old, I would ask my parents about what they meant, and they would basically just say, to try to calm me down, like, they're not real, don't worry about it, right? And you keep having these dreams, and they occasionally, they keep feeling quite real, to the point where you're like referencing them as memory in your daily life. There's a point at which you start to question, like, what does the word real mean? Because is it a feeling, or is it a state, right, of being, or a whole lot more? And so wanted to explore consciousness, and the fields of psychology, psychiatry, and neuroscience have been trying to understand consciousness from a scientific perspective for over 100 years. And so it's when I was looking for what to do with my life, that's what led me there.
It's so fascinating. And I think that's the thing about psychiatry. Many people that know of psychiatrists, they prescribe a pill to basically help with depression, anxiety, or another mental illness disorder. But the thing that we're uncovering, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it is only a bandage, and it only helps so far, because if you're not getting to the root of really what's going on and potentially what has caused this mental illness, then really, how is this for a long term helping us? So I would love to hear, like, what have you learned, how those interventions have maybe been not helping us as much as we've hoped, and what are the new findings that have been revealed in your practice of doing this type of work for so many years now?
Sure. And I think, there's a lot of common misconceptions here that are important to dispel, so everybody knows what the science is actually showing. And I'm really glad you asked this question. So, the main thing is that medicine in general, when you look at studies of medicine, especially for mental health conditions across the board, doesn't really matter what condition you're talking about. It could be depression, anxiety, psychosis, ADHD, that in general, even psychedelic assisted therapy across the board, it seems that the medicine works better when it's administered with proper psychotherapy, right? So having the support of another human being who's an objective figure in your life and it doesn't talk to anybody else in your life, doesn't interact with them, and doesn't judge you, right? They're just like literally somebody you can reflect with, and work on stuff with in a non-judgmental way and feel safer
Mhm.
out. And many of us don't have that feeling in our normal day-to-day lives where we just have like a non-judgmental listener we can talk to at any time about anything we're feeling. And so the studies have shown that you combine this magical human element, right? It's really like an irreplaceably human element of empathy with a medicine. And then the two work much, much better for people to actually get to recovery. And if you and it
Mm.
and the speed of recovery depends on the illness that somebody has and how severe it is, and also the kind of medicine and therapy that you pair. And so this is kind of what modern psychiatry is starting to show is actually the direction that's really helping people. But for probably 30 or 40 years, as you were alluding to, we've been in the era of biological psychiatry where it was suspected that it was just a neurotransmitter thing for a very long time, and
Mhm.
that you just had to change the neurochemistry, therapy didn't matter, and people would just get better. That is in fact not true. You actually need the human element to help get people to the end goal better than 50% of the time.
Yeah, and I think that's where the integration really comes. And this, we'll talk about this later about the psychedelics and also your new findings of healing or helping people manage mental illnesses. But I think that's the thing is you're talking about is kind of this intervention. Like you need something to basically talk about, like when you're at, and again, this is my own experience because I've been on antidepressants when I was younger and to help with anxiety and all the things. And it kind of normalized me so that I could feel not anxious, but calm so that I could rationalize my feelings and be able to talk about it. Right. And so that's
Exactly.
my experience of, and I think that's where the integration is really important. Like you said, you have to have both for it to actually take effect. And I think that's probably where the missing link is some people will take a drug to help battle those depression or anxiety or OCD or whatever, but they don't have the therapy in addition to. So I'd love to hear. So one thing that you're a specialist in is stress, and I think we are all somewhat a specialist in it because we all experience a lot of stress in our lives. And I think the big problem isn't that stress, everyday stress. It's the chronic stress that is leading to the everyday impacting on it, one another. And I think that's one of the things I think all of us need to address because sometimes, as I was mentioning to you offline, sometimes we don't even realize we're stressed. It becomes almost a normal thing. I know I even recently said this last year. I'm like, I don't feel stressed, but I know, like knowing I am stressed. But it almost becomes normal. So what's really the problem here? Because or let's talk about stress a little. Let's unravel it because there is your everyday stresses and then there's chronic stress. So what do we need to know about the difference of both and how it's affecting our body in multiple facets of ways?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But
Yeah.
starting with the last couple things that you brought up, about stress and what it is, there's again lots of misunderstandings about stress, but it's really important to understand is that there's two kinds of stress. Just there's EU stress, which is stress that challenges us to grow in, because it's stress, but it's in like a safe environmental context. And then there's distress, which is stress that creates like a survival response in the body, like the stress that kicks in with our fight or flight system when we evolve to escape from predators and to make sure we always have food and water and air, and that we're not excommunicated by our community, we have community connection, right? These kinds of things, when they're threatened, can become survival threat, and that results in distress. So that's how we evolve to be. That's how we evolve to respond to stress. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
so starting there, if you think about that's the way we evolve, that's the way all And this is what Eric Kandel, in large part, won the Nobel Prize for, was demonstrating these evolutionarily conserved 300 million year old patterns around how do we remember fear and safety through the balance of the safety system, which is the parasympathetic vagal system that's responsible for everything our body does when we're recovering, and like reproduction, digestion, immunity, healthy metabolism, sleep, right? All of those things, empathy, that all the things we want to be putting resources in when we're not running from a lion. And then there's fight or flight, which is kicking on every time our body thinks we're running from a lion. But now we're in a modern life. We don't have actual lions around that much anymore, right? Thank goodness. But we have too many emails. We have too much noise, too many responsibilities, too much news. We have all of this external input coming in that's overstimulating our sensory system, which is effectively telling our amygdala, hey, the fear center, that's that old fear center, goes back to like ancient reptiles. It's like starts flickering off because it's like, hey, there's a lot of new stuff around, right? There's too much going on. I'm not sure what to do about all this, so I'm just going to go into fight or flight mode. And then we wind up having all the issues with fight or flight, which is taking blood from all those recovery systems and sending it
Right.
to the skeletal muscles, the heart, the lungs, the motor cortex of the brain, the fear center of the brain. And then all of our recovery systems are literally nutrient and waste collection depleted for as long as we're in that fight or flight state. As our bodies evolve to not be resourcing empathy and digestion when we're potentially a predator around. Bodies don't know the difference. So
Right.
this is why meditation, mindfulness, yoga, soothing touch, Apollo, and like parasympathetic based, vagal based toning practices are so important and have lasted in humanity for thousands of years, because they train our attention and our mindfulness to understand how to basically train our brains to filter out the noise. So the filtering of, there's always going to be noise. There's always going to be more of it. And the more modern society becomes, the more noisy it's going to be. So it's up to us to teach each other and ourselves how to actually train our brains to filter out the noise.
Hmm. It's so true, and I think what we're hearing a lot today. I mean, obviously, it's true with what you said, but what we're hearing a lot today is leaky gut is a common thing that's shared today. And one of the things that they're saying can cause leaky gut is chronic stress. And I think it's because that gut brain access, of course, but also, as you were saying, it shuts down our systems because we're in this fight or flight. And so we can't digest well. We can't sleep well. There's so many facets of what stress does to us without us even realizing it, because we're in this fight or flight mode and we're not handling it, addressing it head on. And I know a lot of people have developed a meditation practice, a breathwork practice, mindfulness practice. But I think for those people that are listening that are struggling, developing certain tools or practices to help calm their nervous system, what would you recommend? Because I know you talk a lot about HPV and how that helps us develop this resilience and helps
HRV,
us sleep at HRV. So what did I just say?
HPV.
HPV is sorry. Thank you for correcting me. We want to get that right. And how this really affects us. So, what do we need to know about? Uh, what do we need to know about? If we're not able to, or we're struggling to develop a meditation practice, a breathwork practice, what should we do? Like, where would you say we need to begin so that we could calm our nervous system? Where would you lead us to go?
That's also a great question. I mean, I think it starts out with something that everybody should know that most of us weren't told, which is that meditation is really hard when you're starting out, right? Breathwork practices, to actually like learn to how to do them and like get to the different place that they're telling you you're supposed to go when you do them right, like they require a tremendous amount of work and practice, like sometimes hundreds of hours before you
Right.
actually get there. And so I think that makes it really hard for people, because people end up giving up, and they'll put tons of time in, and their expectations will be they're going to get something faster, and it's not a fast practice. It's like a lifelong practice, and it's important for all of us to do. at least a little bit, even just a couple minutes a day. And the other common misunderstanding is, what is meditation? Right? What is meditation? There's so many different kinds of meditation. There's so many different descriptions, definitions. But I think, when you think about like the neuroscience of what's happening and the psychology of what's happening and what's in common between all the different meditation techniques, many of them, and for the most part, start out with, number one, decreasing your breath rate to somewhere between like 5 to 7 breaths per minute to start, and 5 to 7 breaths per minute. So that's one breath in for 5 and out for 5 every minute, and just continuously for a couple minutes. That's how it starts for almost every meditation. And then of the relaxing meditations. And then from there, it's basically an attention exercise. And the attention exercise is, notice a thought, acknowledge that you've noticed that thought, and then let it pass. Right? And then
Right.
if you notice your attention has continued on to some other thoughts, then notice it, acknowledge it, and bring it back to your breath. And then you start noticing your thoughts again, right? And it's actually the practice of meditation, which is the common misunderstanding, is not sitting in the position. It's acknowledging that your attention wandered and then bringing it back to the center. And then every time you do that, every time you notice and you bring it back, you're actually retraining your attention control. And then it gets easier, right? But that is a tedious experience for a lot of people if you don't realize what you're doing. The cool part about it is you can do that anytime, anywhere you are. You can just draw your attention back to your breath and notice where your thoughts are. And so meditation is actually not just a sitting practice. It's like a walking life practice that you can do anytime you are, just by drawing your attention back to your breath in any moment. And the more that you do that, the better you get at meditation. And that's like the mastering of that experience, is not just doing it sitting, but doing it throughout your life.
I think that's so helpful, because I think anybody could do that as you walk through your day today. As after you listen to this, is just as you're walking through your day, just again, like if your thoughts are wandering and you're getting a little anxious or stressed out, just take in that deep breath and hold for 5, and then let it go, and then bring your awareness back into your body. So I think anybody could start to practice that. I do think it's, as you said, it can be very tedious to develop this lifelong practice of meditation and breath work. It's been one of the hardest things for me, just because putting all these things in my day, but of course, putting all these things in my day is exactly what's stressing me out. So what do you think is that, knowing, since you've studied stress for so long and you know so much about this industry and the neuroscience and everything, what do you find is like the most common thing that people are stressing about today, uh, that is really hindering us in, you know, in our health and just our vitality?
I mean, it's not that different than it's been. It's like, it's the news, it's um, politics, it's um, illnesses in the family, too many responsibilities, too many work responsibilities, um, demanding bosses, misaligned expectations, disappointment about things not working out the way that they had hoped. It's all the same stuff that it's always been. There's just more of it, right? And so I
Right.
think, and that's actually going back to your previous question about like, what can we do to calm the body. um, that is actually really important, because sometimes we are spinning out, like we're too overwhelmed, too worried, too anxious, etc. It happens to all of us, to be mindful, right? It's just hard. And it can't be mindful all the time. I mean, that's the goal, but it's really, really tough. And so, that's where these tools of reminding ourselves that we're in control of any situation that we're in, what we're in control of, reminding ourselves of that actually restores that sense of calmness in the body almost immediately. And there's 4 major things that we talk about that are really effective tools for doing that. So it's intentional movement,
Mm,
intentional breathing, intentional listening. So just sitting quietly listening to what's going on around you, and or singing. Actually, the production of sound can
Really?
induce calming in the body and changes your breath rhythm. And then four is intentional touch. So giving yourself a hug, giving a hug to somebody else, holding a pet, somebody holding your hand, stroking your back, right? These are all like evolutionarily conserved from our, from millions of years and our childhood, that are naturally calming to the body. And so many of these things are things we can do ourselves. And that's why we developed the Apollo technology, was from researching all of these modalities at the University of Pittsburgh and realizing that you could actually deliver some of this benefit of calming, safe touch to the body using technology.
Isn't that one of the things you mentioned, that it's really the need to feel safe? Like we have to know in these stressful moments we are safe. Like we are, you know, nothing is attacking us and running after us and going to kill us generally, unless there is a circumstance where you need to react to. But we're talking about every day, the chronic stress that we're all battling, the need to feel safe. And so as you brought up your technology, which of course we want to go into this, of how this has been useful, and you say it's by touch. And so that need to feel safe. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's probably the most important human need. If you look at, if anybody's heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, look it up. If you don't, haven't heard of it, but at the bottom, it's a very famous understanding of like what our core needs are as humans, and it's not necessarily totally complete, but it's really thoughtful and well respected, and has kind of become a standard of psychological thinking around human needs. The core base of it, the foundation, is safety, right? And if we don't feel safe, almost in any respect, like we don't feel mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, legally safe, completely safe, then certain things in our bodies start to shut down, because
Mm,
safety is the stimulus that activates the parasympathetic nervous system. It's like our primary thing that activates the parasympathetic vagal nervous system, which activates all of our recovery nervous systems that can happen when we're not in under threat. So if you think about what is safety, safety is like familiarity. I know this. I've experienced or been around this before. I like this. This is something that feels good to me, right? Like a sense of familiarity, like family, right? Comfort, soothing, gentle things, right? These are all like synonymous with safety. Certainty,
mm,
right? Certainty is a very important safety word. Control, right? These things are very important. And then the opposite is the case for threat and fight or flight. So that's like if safety is this main stimulus that turns on the parasympathetic nervous system, the recovery system, then fear, kind of the opposite of safety or threat, is the primary stimulus that turns on the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system. So that's kind of, and they balance each other out. For
yeah.
re-
I think this is important to talk about because I think there are people out there, and again, I've been in this position, I'm sure most of us have, is where we seek safety from outside of us. Maybe another person, maybe family, maybe a job. Like people stay in a job just for safety, security, even if they aren't happy in it, or in a relationship because it's somewhat safe. And so what I think is really key, and this is partly, Apollo, your wearables, is creating safety, like we are able to create it for ourselves. And so I think that's really the self-discovery piece, is knowing yourself, like what makes you feel safe? Like you as a whole person, what for me, like I feel safe, I feel calm when I go in walks in nature by myself. Actually, I prefer it by myself than somebody else with me. And so I think asking these questions to discover what makes you feel safe, and then bringing in tools that are actually creating that safety, as you have created with Apollo. So I think that's a great thing to kind of touch on. But can you explain your wearable and why this helps calm our nervous system, and how you came about? You kind of touched on it briefly, but how you came about on creating Apollo Neuro and this wearable and how it actually works and how it's proven scientifically to work.
Sure. So Apollo was really the technology when we were studying all this research I've been telling you about around the fear and the safety systems in the body. We were working and studying this in veterans with severe treatment refractory PTSD. So the kind of folks where they've been trying everything for years and they've never responded for more than like a month or two. And then
Mm-hmm.
they're almost sick for their entire course, which is really devastating. And a lot of these people, unfortunately, wind up taking their own lives, which is a huge
Yeah.
issue right now. So this became a really important population to me because of how poorly, effectively, they were being treated. And just not getting the care that they needed. And so I started exploring everything under the sun that I could find that um, helped these people and had any evidence to help them, because it seemed like there was a way to do it. We just needed to, put our heads together. And I discovered that many of these people were benefiting from service animals and getting hugs and
Right.
listening to soothing music, and just they were doing their own things in their lives to surround themselves with soothing things, like I was telling you earlier, right? Just creating, like, I don't even know if they realized what they were doing fully, but they were
Right.
creating a safe, like, ambiance for a nest for themselves, right? And sometimes they had to have music walking around, and that was the thing that they did that helped them, you know calm themselves. But they were able to do it. And then I found, and then of course I started looking into breath work, meditation, yoga, mindfulness, breathing techniques, and all of a lot of like the Eastern medicine type stuff and why that works. Um, and that became interesting. And then I found MDMA assisted therapy, which is the leading treatment right now for PTSD on the horizon. And it's on the desk right now for FDA clearance this year, hopefully.
Wow.
Um, and it is the best treatment for any mental illness in terms of outcomes that I think we've ever had in the history of psychiatry. With just 3 doses and 42 hours of psychotherapy, these people that we're
Mm.
talking about were like totally treatment resistant. Over 55% of them are no longer meeting diagnostic criteria for PTSD after just 12
Wow.
weeks, 3 doses.
Wow.
Right? And I went through I had to get trained in this, and I got trained in 2016. And from the training and the work and learning how to do the work is very intuitive for us as therapists, because the MDMA, and this is what the scientific lab research is now showing, that MDMA is actually seems to be molecularly enhancing safety pathways in the emotional brain, right? Which then
Wow.
tells the amygdala, that fear center that's firing off too much because it's overstimulated. It tells the amygdala, it's like, hey, bud, we're cool. You can calm down. And the amygdala starts to like calm down. And then there's less fear activity. And then people feel safe enough with the MDMA on board, amplifying molecularly this profound safety that and trust that this patients have with the therapist team, that they're able to feel safe enough to literally reappraise the meaning of these past traumatic events for a long
Hmm.
time. That has long lasting impact. Like, people are more better a year out than they were after they finished the treatment. They continue to get better. So I saw this and I was like, okay, this is like the ultimate confirmation of my safety hypothesis. And so we went back to the lab and we started researching ways to generate these safety states that were activating the same neural pathways that were being activated through all these different techniques that we've been talking about. We mapped it all out. And then he said, well, how do we activate that as easily as possible for people, that feels in the best that it can feel, that could ideally be wearable and, not have any side effects? And we studied a whole bunch of different stuff and eventually concluded on vibration. That's sound waves, low frequency sound waves, like what comes out of a subwoofer. And that is delivered at a very low intensity that you can feel, that the touch receptors are sensitive to, all over our bodies, but our ears can't really hear it. And it's just sound. So we figured out in the lab that there are, through multiple double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled crossover studies and real-world studies, 6 of which will actually be published this year, that we could reliably deliver these specific rhythms of sound waves that feel like tactile vibration. They feel like a cat purring on your body, and
Mm.
we could deliver them anywhere on the body, and they reliably start to reduce heart rate, improve heart rate variability, improve parasympathetic tone, improve cognitive performance, help people calm down before sleep and sleep more deeply to the tune of like 30 more
Wow.
minutes of sleep a night, which is concentrated and deep in REM because you need to feel safe to enter deep sleep states. Like we know that, right? That's been known for a really long time. So so it has dramatic impact, and those rhythms are interestingly enough, they're at the rhythms of our breath when we start to enter a meditative state. That's what does it for people. It's about 5 to 7 breaths per minute. And so what we
Mm.
discovered is there's a very specific rhythm of that breath pattern that you can oscillate between 5 and 7 breaths per minute and more, that starts to nudge people's energy states up and down reliably. And so that is what we put through the trial. We tested in the trials and figured out. And then that's what we released to the public as Apollo Neuro in 2020.
In 2020, wow. So it is, but oh my God. I mean, I'm mind blown by it because how huge is this for some people? Again, like we're all battling stress. I don't know. We're, as we were kind of touching on earlier in the interview, and I was funny enough just thinking of this last night. I'm like, what if we didn't have cell phones? I'm like, obviously, if we go back to that, because we could, our age, we could go back to that time. And I was imagining this yesterday. I don't know why I was thinking of it, but I'm like, imagine if we didn't have that, how much less stress we would have. And I'm sure you know this by your clinical studies. What was stress like, let's say 10 years ago compared to stress today?
Um, I actually don't have that information on the top of my head, but I can give you a similar statistic that I think is
Yeah.
relevant, which is there was a study came out, I think it was about 3 years ago, that looked at um, the overall just quantity of information consumption
Yeah.
now compared to what we were taking in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And if you look at your phone when you wake up in the morning, which is most people, in that first 30 minutes of you looking at your phone, you're taking in what people in the 1950s took in terms of amount of information. You're taking in a week's worth of 1950s information in 2023,
Right.
2024, right? In 30 minutes. 30
Wow.
minutes, you're taking in a week's worth of information, right? And a week's
Yeah.
worth of newness, right? So that's a lot. So that if you think about like that impact of smartphones alone and just screens everywhere, right? We are, we're probably like 100 to 1,000 times more stimulated now with information than we were in the 1950s overall. I mean, it's crazy.
Exactly. It's so nuts, and that's why I was just thinking of it. I'm like, because I know it's a tool of stress because of course, like all these things coming at us, reminders or whatever it may be, or to get as many likes as you want on your social, whatever it may be. It's silly in some regard, but your wearable just sounds absolutely phenomenal. And I'm curious, how long do you have to wear it? Let's say if you did want to wind down to get restful sleep, how long do you have to wear it before you go to sleep for the benefits to start um, contributing
Yeah, I mean,
to having more restful sleep?
it depends how amped you are at night, right? And
Okay.
probably depends on how much caffeine you had late in the day and other things. So it's not a simple answer, but I would say for most
Yeah,
people, it's about 30 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes. You just throw on the sleep vibes and then it takes you into sleepy time. And then
that's so
we actually,
remarkable.
yeah, I mean, it's like putting on, it's like not the same, but an analogy would be that it's kind of similar to like your mom rocking you to sleep as a baby, right?
Wow.
When you're upset and you're having racing thoughts or you're restless or whatever, and you're a baby and you can't verbalize it, you just cry. Your mom rocks you to sleep, or if you have kids, you've probably rocked your kids to sleep, and that is the feeling that is not. This doesn't replace. It's just it reminds us of that feeling. in our bodies.
So remarkable. So remarkable. Of course, as you know, I'm going to plug this in the show notes, everybody. So I know you're going to want to grab it right away. I think it's kind of a no brainer, and I'm excited to try it myself. So, moving into psychedelics, since you kind of touched on a little bit, this is a big topic today. Also, it's something that you're speaking a lot about of the change we are seeing in mental health using psychedelics and how this helps. So, I'd love if you could kind of explain maybe a little bit about where it was maybe a year plus ago and where it is today, and what do we need to know about psychedelics, and how is this really changing mental health treatment?
I think the main thing to know that's different from a year ago to today is that, we now have um, the first new psychedelic medicine, MDMA, which is for those who have never heard of it, it's a methamphetamine compound, so similar family, same family as Adderall or Ritalin,
Mm.
but it's stimulant family, but and MDMA stands for 3,4 methylene dioxymethamphetamine, and it stimulates interestingly enough, in large part, an emotional cortex of our brains. So rather than Adderall, which stimulates a lot of the frontal stuff and a lot of everything in general, MDMA has a more emotional focus, and so it's like very much amplifying of like feelings of safety and comfort in our bodies, feelings of warmth, feelings of self love, gratitude, self acceptance, non judgmental self acceptance, right? So these kinds of things that are actually neural pathways in our brains that already exist, MDMA just kind of amplifies those pathways. So that is now probably within a year of FDA clearance, which will mean that those of us who are trained in that technique can start to deliver it to patients with PTSD, which is really exciting. And because
Huge.
it's easily one of the most effective treatments we've ever had for mental illness. I think we were talking about that earlier. So very exciting.
I was going to say it is so exciting because, as we know, and I'm very passionate about the military as well and those that suffer PTSD. I mean, as we know, the high suicide rate and that these typical treatments in mental health, uh, prescribed pills and whatnot, it hasn't done its job, right? It hasn't reached longevity of healing these people with their mental illness, and so this is like, I mean, revolutionary, if you ask me. But the one thing I think is important to talk about is the intervention piece, like that you must have, as we kind of touched on earlier in the episode, you must have, or to my understanding, if you could kind of touch on this, when doing these sort of treatments, there still needs to be the intervention, if I'm correct. There still needs to be
Yeah,
the therapy that goes along with integrating it.
yeah, absolutely. And we do within the MDMA therapy protocol that is on the FDA's desk to get the kinds of results that I was telling you. We're doing 42 hours of therapy with two therapists every session with the
Yeah.
patient for 12 weeks with 3 doses of medicine. So that's 42 hours of psychotherapy to get to your end goal. So that's like the minimum right now, and that's what
Yeah.
is seems to be a huge part of why we're seeing these tremendous results. However, it's important to note that while MDMA therapy will have to be administered with these kinds of therapy protocols because of the FDA's scrutiny, this is not the case with ketamine. And ketamine is actually the only legal psychedelic medicine that we have access to right now, because it was originally approved and used as an anesthetic agent for surgery and for evacuating wounded soldiers from the battlefield in Vietnam.
Hmm.
Um, and it is a very powerful pain medication and um, dissociative anesthetic. So it's real, and it just happened to have quite profound psychedelic effects that are antidepressant, very rapidly antidepressant, that seem to be anti-suicidal acutely, which is
Hmm.
really interesting, right? Like
Hmm.
somebody can come in acutely suicidal, and you can give them a dose of ketamine, and they can be better and not have suicidal thoughts for 1, 2 weeks, maybe 3 after, and then that gives them a chance to, like, you know get some help.
Work
So
through it
that's
per se. Yeah, get help.
yeah, and work through it and get help, not still being stuck in that like
Loop
terrible
of
place in your heads. Like that's a really hard place to get out of without some assistance. So so ketamine used in some of these contexts has shown some fascinating promise that we haven't seen with other kinds of drugs. And it only lasts like 60 to 90 minutes, so it's like a really gentle, overall, really easier psychedelic experience for people. But because that it came up through the anesthesia ER world, it is mostly administered in ketamine clinics by anesthesia or ER docs, and so they don't do therapy, and
mm,
most of them do not plan to do therapy. So what we've found, however, is that therapy makes this medicine work much better and gets you much longer lasting benefits to the medicine that persist after you stop taking the medicine. So similar to like an MDMA effect. Um, and so we've written a paper that was published last year, kind of a summary review of the evidence around this topic for psychedelic therapy, and talking about really in large part how the therapy component is critical, and we really need, and it needs to be the gold standard. We need to move on and stop arguing about, is therapy important to with the medicine, because it is for every single mental health medicine. So we need to be teaching the therapy and setting standards for people to do the therapy. Even if you're not the person to administer it, have a therapist, separate therapist in your practice who does it, or work with another practice that has therapy that offers the integration. But it's basically irresponsible to give people psychedelics
absolutely.
without, as a clinician, without any kind of like therapeutic support.
Yeah, even like a lot of people have heard of ayahuasca these days, which is a psychedelic, but they still have somebody that is able to administer this and that has knowledge of the medicine, if you want to say. But they also usually, I've heard this from people that have taken it, it's like there's still the integration of it. Like, because I heard you speak about this on another episode, that psychedelics bring you a deeper awareness that you don't have in your everyday world with all the noise. We are not able to be aware and conscious of what's lying underneath that, everyday modern world noise. And so these psychedelics bring the awareness and the consciousness of really, like, let's say, past trauma, PTSD, whatever it may be. And so if we have this new awareness, imagine not being able to understand and integrate it and work with it. So it's like, if you don't have that piece, I think it could possibly cause more trauma, I would assume. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely, you nailed it. I think that at this point where we are in like Western medicine and the Western world, it's not necessarily safe to just go and do ayahuasca anywhere too. You need to be really,
Right.
really careful um, about where you go and make sure it's a trusted, responsible place that is safe. Because there's a lot of these places that are not, and there are a lot of resources out there for people who, if anybody reaches out and wants to know, like, where can I go safely, there are databases of these places that our colleagues have stored over the years for people. And so, because it's really important there, and people, I think to the point that you were expressing, the people who have these really tremendous experiences going down to say like Peru or Colombia and doing like a traditional ayahuasca ceremony are people who are doing it with indigenous lineage trained
Yes.
shamans who have been passing this work down their families for sometimes hundreds or hundreds of years or longer, right? And so those people have very specific traditions, and they're health conscious and they're environmentally conscious and human conscious, and they're very focused on safety as being a critical element to their experience, and the experience of everybody who works with them, because they're really like trained to do their work. And it's
Yeah.
really important to find those people because there aren't that many of those people around. So most people who are around are actually uh, not that, and they could be dangerous. And I say this because I have a lot of patients who I see who actually come back from very
I know.
traumatizing experiences with some of these folks.
Wow. I mean, I think that's a really good point because social media, a lot of people are sharing these. They're sharing their ayahuasca experiences or ketamine or all these things. And I think sometimes it could be not in the intent that they mean, but it could be received as like, oh, I could just get this by somebody else. And they don't talk about the full experience of what really goes on behind the scenes and then afterwards or before even. And I think that's why, of course, people like you that are bringing the science, bringing obviously, you know, your that this is a practice, this is something that you must be safe about, but it's also very helpful, very transformative in the mental health industry. But I think this is really great to bring more knowledge, people like yourself that are bringing more awareness of what psychedelics can do and how it's helping people that are really struggling, such as PTSD patients. So I'm so thankful for your work and your research, and also you creating something such as your wearable Apollo Neuro. I just think it's huge today because, again, as we were talking about, stress is something we're all kind of specialists in our own way because we endure it so often. So I want people to really take away from this episode. How could we, after listening to this episode, maybe redefine how we look at stress and be our own best doctor and manage it? Like, how could we actually take away from this episode and be able to take the tools, some of the ones you've shared, is what is such as the wearable, what could you leave us with so that we could really handle the stress that we have in our everyday life, whether it be, you know, again, it could be just the normal person that does deal with chronic stress. PTSD and all the other things is a whole nother level. And I know that could be addressed in a separate episode. But as far as the everyday person that is just enduring a massive amount of stress, what can we do?
I think the first thing is to just know in spirituality practices they describe it as like, and in psychology it's like knowing that you have all the tools that you need right now in any moment,
Mm,
right? And in neuroscience it would be, and evolutionary psychology it's like knowing that we evolved to adapt to whatever comes our way and to grow from it, right? That's what we evolved to do. That's why we still exist as a species on this earth, right? Look at how much challenge we have overcome. Look at like life-threatening pandemics and other chaos and things that we've caused, and war and famine, and like we have been, you know, we've been almost taken out tons of times and we're still here,
right,
right?
right,
Um, and so we have this unique ability that we have evolved as humans to collaboratively adapt like so adapt as a group to challenge and to individually adapt to challenge. We evolved it. That means that we can do it. That means there's a lot of hope, because if you know you can do it, then it's really just figuring out the way to do it as best you can without, you know, suffering too much pain in the process, right? And I think for a lot of people, there's a lot of pain and um, a lot of pain that comes from thinking or spending time in thinking in the thought, in the thought process of maybe I can't do it, right? I
right.
can't, what's wrong with me that I can't do it, that everybody else seems like they can do it, right? And then that starts to create this like negative thought loop, which actually creates fear in our own bodies of ourselves, right? We're saying that we make the assumption over time and practice thinking that there's something wrong with us, that we can't do this. Everybody's struggling. Everyone. There's not a single person that's not struggling sometimes. And if they tell you that
Yeah,
they're not struggling sometimes, they're not struggling at all. They're a liar. So everybody
right.
struggles. Like this is like the common human experience. We evolved to do this individually and together. And guess what? Most things are easy together. So the more we work together, the more we open up to each other, the more we create safe space for each other to interact in, to connect in, to be intimate in, the better for all of us. And we can do it on our own for ourselves by just starting to accept ourselves, right? And accept ourselves as, who we are. And I know that it often sounds a lot simpler than it actually is, but it really is the practice of just expressing gratitude to yourself, right? To instill that, you said it earlier, right? This inner sense of safety is that
Hmm.
I'm cool with me, right? It's that
Yep.
feeling, which takes practice because we didn't learn to do that for most of us. But by just starting to find things about yourself throughout the day to be grateful for, like I'm walking, I'm really grateful for my feet that they can take me places, right? And my legs that are like, strong enough to walk me to where I need to go. And, just find things to be grateful for about you and about different things about you, especially you. And that starts to repair that self trauma, right? That fear or sense of something being wrong with us. And that is sort of like where the healing process really starts to like skyrocket, because you're doing the practices that are actively rewiring the parts of our brains at the core. Like you
Right.
said, get to the source, right? How do we get to the source? So,
Right.
if you want to like dig beneath the surface and really get to the source is that we're afraid, right? We're afraid of ourselves. We're afraid that something's wrong with us. We're afraid of uncertainty in the world. So let's get to that, and then start. If we recognize, hey, that's what neuroscience says. So let's start doing the safety practices, right? Let's start training our mind and body to feel safe and present again. And we know what those practices are. They're the kinds of things that I told you just now. And then it's like the intentional, thoughtful breathing, the movement, the listening and singing, and soothing touch. And of course, things like mindfulness, right? So gratitude practice, you can throw those in there too. All of these things work together to
So
just,
useful.
you know, get you there faster.
Yeah, it's so phenomenal. And I know on the flip side of that is how can we strengthen our stress resilience? And that's why ice baths are so the hot thing right now. And also resistance training, putting
Yep.
yourself in healthy, stressful situations to strengthen your endurance of stress that might come in other facets of your life. I think that's really useful too. And I know that's a tool that people could also use and add to their life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that all the practices that I just mentioned and the stuff that you mentioned, the hot and cold plunge and the resistance training and all of that, doing that in healthy amounts is all under the family of building resilience. They all make us more
Excellent.
resilient. And that's where we come back to like HRV, heart rate variability, which is the
Right.
rate of change of our heartbeat over time, is our best biometric that you can collect through like a wearable device, through the skin. You don't need a lab. And that is a measure of resilience, and which is how recovered the body is and how likely we are to bounce back from stress or threat when it comes and then when it goes. How quickly do we respond and get to safety? That's resilience,
That's
right? And that's one of the single
so
most
great.
important, other than adaptation. That's like one of the it kind of works with adaptation, right? That's like one of the single most important um, human characteristics that we have. It's what keeps us alive.
Right. Oh, I'm so glad we threw that in at the end of the episode because that's such an important factor is how could we continue to strengthen our resilience against these things that will always come at us. So, so good. So good. Dr. Dave Rabin, I am so appreciative of all we got into this episode. There's so much valuable information and so much nuance as well that I think a lot of people are intrigued about that possibly don't know the depth of all that you shared. So, of course, I know people would be interested to learn more about you and also your new findings and basically what's coming up to help us, be more resilient, build strength, and reduce our stress and chronic diseases and just live healthier, more vibrant lives. So, where can people best learn more about you and find more about your everything you shared today?
You can check out my website, drdave.io, and you can find information about Apollo at apolloneuro.com. That's APOLLONEURO.com. Or you can go to wearablehugs.com, which is what the kids call it.
Love it.
And you can find me on socials. I always like to hear from you at Dr. David Rabin on Instagram and Twitter. And I have a show that comes out quarterly that is about consciousness and sort of like breaking down these new discoveries of how the brain works for everyone, so that everyone can understand these cool discoveries we've made, on Spotify and Apple Podcast, or Apple Music, and it's called Your Brain Explained. So come find me there too.
Awesome. So much goodness. Well, Dave, I so appreciate you. Thank you for sharing everything you have today. This is so valuable and just appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.